The ancient road, a ribbon of cracked asphalt, unspooled beneath my wheels, narrower with every mile until it dwindled to little more than a dirt track swallowed by the encroaching moss and gnarled roots. Fog, a ceaseless living shroud, clung to the landscape, tasting of salt and decay, blurring the edges of the world until only the immediate, the pressing, remained. This was not a place one simply passed through. It was a destination, a finality, a forgotten corner of the coast where the sea whispered secrets into the rock face and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. My determination, a brittle shield against the encroaching unease, had brought me here. I was Blake, and this journey, this inheritance, was a burden I had volunteered to shoulder. The letter from the solicitor had been terse, almost dismissive, detailing the death of a distant reclusive relative I barely remembered. A name whispered in hushed tones during my infrequent childhood visits to my grandparents, always associated with a house too far, a life too strange. Now that house, that life, was mine. The town, when I finally reached its ragged edge, was a collection of hunched gray buildings, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at the perpetual mist. A lone fishing boat, listing heavily, was tethered to a barnacle-encrusted dock, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. No children played in the street, no laughter carried on the damp air. Only the rhythmic, mournful clang of a distant buoy bell punctuated the silence. A sound that seemed to measure the passage of something vast and sorrowful. His gaze was not curious, but knowing, ancient, as if he had seen my kind arrive countless times before. The house itself materialized from the fog like a phantom ship, a hulking skeletal silhouette against the gray canvas of the sky. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, wrestled with the crumbling brickwork, a green stranglehold that seemed to draw the very life from the structure. A forgotten garden, choked with weeds and the skeletal remains of rose bushes, stretched before it, a wild, untamed wilderness guarded by a rusty iron gate that groaned in protest as I pushed it open. I parked my car, its modern lines an incongruous splash against the ancient decay, and stepped out onto the gravel drive. The house loomed, a monument to solitude, its presence not merely architectural, but almost biological, a dormant beast stirring in its long slumber. I walked towards the heavy oak door, scarred and pitted by centuries of sea wind, its knocker a corroded iron fist. The door swung inward with a groan that echoed through the cavernous space beyond, a sound like a sigh. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light that pierced the grimy windows, swirling in the air like trapped spirits. The smell inside was overwhelming. Mildew, stale pipe smoke, something akin to dried lavender, and an undercurrent of something else. Something I couldn't quite place. A scent both organic and alien, like old bone dust mixed with ozone. The air was heavy, still, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. I stepped across the threshold, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust and fallen plaster. The entrance hall was vast, dimly lit, dominated by a grand, sweeping staircase whose banister was carved with an intricate, unsettling pattern of intertwining vines and faces that seemed to grimace in the gloom. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped from the chandelier like funeral shrouds. My breath hitched. This was not merely an old house. It was a tomb, a reliquary of forgotten time. My gaze drifted to a closed door to my left. I remembered a similar door from my hazy childhood memories, a door that led to a small, seldom-used sitting room. Yet, as I approached it, a disquieting sensation prickled at the back of my neck. The dimensions felt wrong. The wall where the door stood seemed to extend further than it should, the angle of the archway subtly off-kilter. My mind recoiled, a sudden sharp jolt of disorientation. This was my childhood home, or at least a version of it etched into my earliest recollections. But it was slightly wrong rooms in the wrong order. The familiar geometry of memory had been subtly warped, like a reflection in rippled water. I retreated from the corridor, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was as if the very walls were breathing, a slow, deliberate inhale and exhale. And I, Blake, was now caught within its weave. The ancient engine coughed, a final ragged breath before falling silent. The sudden absence of its thrumming left a void, filled only by the whisper of the fog and the distant, mournful cry of a gull. Its gabled roof sagged, a broken brow above hollow windows that stared like blind eyes into the spectral mist. A heavy oak door, scarred and weathered, stood ajar, a gaping mouth inviting me into its gloom. Yet, I had come too far to falter. With a deep, steadying breath, I pushed open the car door. The air tasted of wet earth, salt, and something else. A faint, musty sweetness, like decaying flowers. My boots crunched on the gravel path, each step echoing unnaturally in the muffled quiet. The house seemed to draw in the sound, swallowing it whole. As I approached the threshold, the massive door creaked wider, as if responding to my presence, revealing a cavernous hall steeped in perpetual twilight. My footsteps on the wide, planked floorboard seemed deafening. A grand staircase, its banister carved with intricate, swirling patterns that writhed in the gloom, dominated the entrance. I dropped my duffel bag and a box of essentials just inside the door, the thud resonating through the silent house. To my left, a vast drawing room stretched, shrouded in drop cloths that draped over unseen furniture, giving the room the appearance of a graveyard of giants. To my right, what I assumed was the dining room, equally veiled. But as I moved deeper, a subtle wrongness began to prickle at the edges of my perception. I turned down a short corridor, expecting it to lead to a kitchen, as it always had in the vague, half-formed memories of my childhood visits. Instead, it opened into a smaller, windowless room, filled with stacks of ancient, mildewed books. This was not the kitchen. The layout felt like a familiar melody played on an instrument slightly out of tune. I retreated, my brow furrowed, and tried another passage, one I remembered leading to a study. This path, however, curved unexpectedly, terminating in a solid brick wall, stark and unyielding. My fingers traced the rough mortar, confusion blooming into a disquieting unease. There should have been a window here, a view of the overgrown rose garden. I tried to rationalize it, attributing the discrepancies to the passage of time, the vagaries of memory, perhaps even structural changes made by the reclusive relative. It was the same house, yet profoundly alien. I found myself in a long, narrow hall, far longer than I recalled. A door at the far end, plain and unadorned, drew me forward. It felt less like a room and more like a swallowed crypt. I pulled the door shut quickly, a shiver running down my spine. My exploration continued, a slow, methodical circuit of the ground floor. Every turn brought a new spatial distortion, a reconfigured reality. A small, forgotten sitting room I distinctly remembered having a fireplace now had a blank wall. A window I expected to overlook the driveway instead presented a view of a dense, impenetrable thicket of ancient, thorny bushes, too close to the house to be natural. It was nothing, I told myself, just the house settling or the wind. But the air around me felt suddenly heavy, charged with an unseen presence. I decided to claim a bedroom, a small act of defiance against the house's unsettling embrace. I ascended the grand staircase, its wood groaning under my weight. On the first landing, a series of doors lined a corridor. I chose one at random, pushing it open. The room within was spacious, with a tall, four-poster bed draped in dusty sheets. A large window overlooked the fog-shrouded grounds, the world outside a blurry gray canvas. As I set my duffel bag on the floor, a floorboard directly behind me creaked loudly, as if someone had just stepped off it. I froze, my heart thrumming against my ribs. I was alone. I knew I was alone. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the empty space. Nothing. The house was not merely old, it was alive. A vast breathing entity that had begun to stretch its limbs around me. The ancient engine's final ragged breath had left me stranded, not just by the roadside, but in a silence that felt deeper than any I had ever known. Before me, the house loomed, a skeletal hand reaching from the swirling gray, its gabled roof sagging like the shoulders of a defeated giant. The fog, thick and cold, tasted of salt and something else. Something metallic and old, like forgotten blood on rust. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of mildewed paper and something faintly sweet, almost floral, yet deeply unsettling. It was the smell of decay trying to mask itself. The front door, a heavy slab of oak carved with an intricate, almost demonic knotwork, stood ajar. I pushed it further, and it yielded with a drawn-out sigh, revealing a cavernous hall swallowed by twilight. This was it. The place my relative Elias had retreated to. The place he had died in. Alone. My eyes strained, trying to make sense of the gloom. But the staircase now seemed to twist at an odd angle. Too steep, too narrow. The parlor, if this was it, was a desolate space. Its once vibrant wallpaper peeling in leprous flakes, revealing the bare plaster beneath like exposed bone. The stuffed birds were gone, replaced by the unsettling silhouettes of cobwebs hanging like shredded shrouds. A sense of profound disorientation settled over me, heavier than the dust. I moved from room to room, a ghost in my own past. The grand dining room, where I vaguely recalled hushed family gatherings, was now a small, cluttered antechamber, its windows boarded over. It was as if the house itself had shifted, rearranged its internal organs, not merely aged. It was a conscious distortion, a mockery of what had been, and it gnawed at the edges of my sanity. How could a house fundamentally change its layout? The room was choked with books, their spines cracked and faded, lining shelves that sagged under their weight. The air here was particularly dense, a rich stew of old paper, stagnant air, and something else. A faint metallic tang, like old pennies left too long in the rain. A heavy oak desk dominated the center, cluttered with forgotten spectacles, dried inkwells, and a scattering of loose papers. Unlike the others, these were not neatly arranged. A few had fallen, creating a small, disheveled gap. As I reached out, my fingers brushed against the rough wood of the shelf, and I felt a subtle give. Not just the shelf, but the entire section of wall behind it. A shiver traced its way up my spine. I pressed harder, feeling the soft click of a hidden latch. My breath caught in my throat. There were 3 leather-bound journals, their covers worn smooth with handling, their pages crammed with a tight, looping script. Beside them, a stack of faded photographs, their sepia tones barely clinging to the images they held. My fingers trembled as I reached in, pulling out the top journal. I opened it to a random page, my eyes scanning the dense, urgent handwriting. It feeds on the turning of the mind, the unraveling threads of what was. Elias, my dear cousin, you were right. This house, it is not merely old. It is hungry. My eyes darted to the next entry, a few pages later, scrawled with a frantic intensity. They are not sounds, not truly. They are thoughts, implanted, twisting my own memories, making me doubt the very ground beneath my feet. It wants my grief, my fear. It wants to replace my history with its own insidious narrative. The presence is real. It is woven into the very mortar, the very beams. I swallowed, a dry, rasping sound in the suffocating quiet. Elias hadn't been simply reclusive. He had been fighting. This was no ordinary haunting. This was something deeper, something that sought to consume. I carefully set the journal down and picked up the photographs. They were old, tintypes mostly, depicting stern-faced men and women in stiff, formal attire. They were my ancestors. Their eyes, even in the faded images, held a disquieting intensity. But in one photograph, a group portrait taken on the very steps of this house, I noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible distortion in the background, a blurring of the lines of the house itself, as if its edges were melting or breathing. And in the eyes of one woman, a distant relative I dimly recognized from old family trees, there was not just fear, but a profound, hopeless vacancy, as if something vital had been drained from her. The flickering light from the dusty window seemed to dim further, plunging the room into a deeper, more profound twilight. I clutched the journal tighter, its pages cool against my palm, the weight of its secrets pressing down on me. I had found the clues, the concrete evidence. And the house, this monstrous thing that was my inheritance, had just begun to stir. Elias hadn't been simply reclusive. He had been fighting. This was no ordinary haunting. This was something deeper, something that sought to consume. They were old, tintypes, each metallic surface a mirror to a bygone era, yet they hummed with a fresh, unsettling energy. Faces stared out, rigid and unsmiling, from backgrounds that were unmistakably the house. A hearth, a window, a stretch of the peculiar mottled wallpaper I'd come to know. But something was askew. A shadow stretched too long, a face too indistinct, a background detail subtly, monstrously wrong. In one, a woman's silhouette seemed to melt into the wall behind her, her features a smear against the patterned paper. In another, a child stood by a window, but the glass reflected nothing but an impenetrable, swirling gray, not the familiar fog outside. The house itself, even in these still images, felt alive, a silent predator. The house had always been a liar, twisting perception, blurring the lines between what was and what never should have been. Elias had recorded its lies, had tried to document its insidious grip. And now it was my turn. I needed air, perspective. The silence of the house, once merely oppressive, now felt like the held breath of a waiting thing. I needed to see other faces, hear other voices, even if they offered no answers, only echoes. The town. Perhaps there, amidst the other lives, I could find a thread, a corroboration to Elias's frantic scrawls. The fog, a perpetual shroud, clung to the winding lane leading from the house, muffling the already hushed world. It tasted of salt and damp stone, a flavor that seemed to seep into my very bones. A single lamp, already lit despite the early afternoon, cast a weak yellow halo against the encroaching murk. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the only establishment that showed a flicker of light. A small, dusty general store smelling of aged wood, forgotten spices, and something vaguely metallic. A bell above my head jingled, a startlingly sharp sound in the quiet. Behind a counter laden with an assortment of goods, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow looked up from polishing a glass. His eyes, the color of deep sea, held a wary curiosity that quickly shuddered. "Afternoon?" I offered, my voice feeling rough from disuse. "Afternoon," he replied, his tone flat, the glass still in his hand. He didn't ask what I needed, just watched. "I'm Blake," I continued, forcing a casualness I didn't feel. "I've inherited Elias's place up the lane." The man's hand paused, the polishing cloth still. A faint tremor ran through his fingers. He finally set the glass down with a soft thud. He kept to himself, Elias did. "So I've gathered," I said, trying to gauge his reaction. He left a lot, unfinished. I was hoping to learn a little more about him, about the area. I gestured vaguely towards the window where the fog pressed against the pane like a hungry face. The local history. He picked up another glass, began polishing with renewed vigor. Not much history here, young man. Just the sea. And the fog. His eyes darted to mine, then away, scanning the shelves as if for an unseen threat. Folks mostly keep to themselves in these parts. Always have. What about the gray sickness? I pressed, remembering a phrase from Elias's journal, a barely legible scrawl amidst frantic warnings. Or the fog eater. The cloth slipped from his fingers, clattering to the counter. His face, already pale, seemed to drain further, taking on the grayish hue of the very mist outside. He snatched up the cloth, his movements jerky. Old wives' tales, those, he rasped, but his voice was tight, strained. Childish stories for the long nights. Nothing to trouble yourself with. He wouldn't meet my gaze. His eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder, as if something unseen stood there listening. Best not to go digging up old stories. Some things are best left buried. I lingered, but he offered nothing more, retreating into a shell of forced industry, polishing the same spot on the counter, his back rigid. The silence stretched, heavy and humid, until it became unbearable. It wound around my legs, tugged at my coat. The town felt emptier, the few other buildings silent and shuttered. A lone figure, an old woman bent almost double, shuffled out of an alleyway, her shawl pulled tight around her head. Her eyes, roomy and ancient, fixed on me with an intensity that made me stop. She raised a gnarled hand, pointing a trembling finger, not at me, but towards the lane leading back to the house. Her voice, when it came, was a dry rustle of dead leaves. The house. It hungers, doesn't it? Always hungers. Her gaze, however, was fixed on the shifting gray around us. The gray sickness. It starts small, a whisper in the mind, a memory out of place. Then it grows. It takes the color, the sound, the very shape of things, until all that's left is the fog. She coughed, a rattling sound in her chest. And the fog eater comes for what's left behind. Her eyes, wide and unnervingly lucid, met mine. Don't let it take your memories, boy. That's how it feeds. Elias had documented a fight. The house wasn't merely a place. It was a hungry entity, and its tendrils stretched far beyond its crumbling walls, into the very fabric of this desolate, fog-choked coast. And I, Blake, was now squarely in its path. The biting words of the old woman still clung to me, a frigid shroud that no amount of hearthfire could dispel. Her phantom presence, a wisp in the swirling coastal mist, had receded, but the chill she left behind was far more real, sinking into my bones, settling in the hollows of my mind. Elias had documented a fight, she'd said. The town knew of it, whispered of it, and now so did I. Though the details remained a gaping maw in my understanding. I retreated into the house, seeking the familiar solace of its decaying grandeur, but found only a deepening disquiet. Each breath felt heavier, laden with unseen particles that seemed to coat my tongue. As dusk bled across the sky, painting the high, arched windows in bruised purples and grays, the house began its subtle, insidious work. A grandfather clock in the hall, long silent, let out a soft, almost imperceptible tick. Then another, its rhythm uneven, a broken heartbeat. I spun, but the pendulum remained motionless, a frozen smile. My own breath hitched in my throat, a dry, rasping sound. I tried to focus, to ground myself in the tangible. But even these familiar textures felt alien, as if a thin, invisible membrane separated me from their reality. The tapestry on the wall, depicting a hunting scene, seemed to shift, the painted leaves rustling in a breeze that didn't exist. The eyes of the hounds following my progress with unnerving intensity. The walls themselves began to breathe. It was a sound that seemed to originate not from the structure, but from within it, from its very sinews. I sought the library, intending to re-examine Elias's journals, to find some anchor in his frantic scrawls. I knew the layout of this house, or thought I did. From the parlor, a short passage led to the main staircase, and beyond that, the library. I turned the corner, my hand reaching for the familiar oak doorframe, but my fingers met empty air. Instead of the wide, welcoming arch of the library entrance, I found a narrow, unfamiliar corridor, unlit, stretching into an inky blackness that swallowed the faint light from the parlor. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced I had simply taken a wrong turn, a momentary lapse in attention. I retraced my steps, past the parlor, past the silent, ticking clock, and tried again. This time, the corridor was gone. It blocked the path entirely. This wasn't just a trick of light or the fatigue of sleepless nights. This was a deliberate rearrangement. The very architecture of my reality was being rewritten, not by my own memory, but by some external, malevolent will. The wardrobe felt solid, unyielding, an impossible barrier where none should exist. Panic began to coil in my gut. I pressed my palm against the cool, unforgiving wood, then turned, desperate. Where was the library? The dining room, usually to the left of the parlor, was now a small, windowless chamber I vaguely remembered as a linen closet. It was a child's, ethereal and sorrowful, blending with the rhythmic thrumming of the house. Then, a flicker. In the tarnished silver of a forgotten mirror hanging on a wall that had, moments ago, been bare, I saw it. A pale, gaunt face, not my own, but vaguely familiar, twisted in a silent scream. The image lasted only a fraction of a second, dissolving into the dull reflection of my own terrified features. But the impression lingered, a raw wound on my retina. Was it an ancestor? Elias? My breath came in ragged gasps. The house was not merely distorting the visible. It was reaching deeper into the very roots of my perception, plucking at the threads of my memory, weaving its own monstrous tapestry. I was adrift, untethered, and the house, with its ancient, hungry heart, was pulling me under. Elias had known. I was certain. He had understood the gnawing hunger of this place, the subtle shift in its breath, the way it swallowed light and memory alike. My only hope, a flickering candle in the encroaching gloom, lay in the leather-bound volumes stacked haphazardly on the study table. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, a blind, milky eye observing my solitary vigil. I pulled the closest journal towards me, its cover worn smooth by countless anxious hands, its pages brittle beneath my fingertips. Elias's script, once a mere curiosity, now pulsed with a terrible urgency. He wrote of the house not as a structure, but as a living skin. It breathes, Blake, though no lungs draw air. It hungers, though no stomach churns. Sorrow. Grief. Elias had detailed how the house, this monstrous inheritance, fed. Not on blood, not on fear in the crude way of a common ghoul, but on the delicate, intricate tapestries of human despair. He meticulously cataloged the patterns. A sudden, inexplicable melancholy that would grip an occupant. A memory resurfacing with a vivid, almost hallucinatory clarity, only to be slowly, subtly distorted, then finally, utterly consumed. My mother spoke of her lost child daily. One entry read, "The ink faded to a pale sepia." The house would grow quiet then, a deep, resonant hush. And in her quiet grief, I would feel a distinct presence. The house didn't just haunt, it harvested. A faint creak echoed from the floorboards above, a sound too heavy for the settling of old timber. It was deliberate, a slow, drawn-out groan that seemed to resonate with the words on the page. My determination, though frayed, held firm. I needed to know the full extent of this generational nightmare. Elias's later entries became more frantic, the script jagged, sprawling. He had chronicled the house's growth, its increasing appetite. It learns, it adapts. It cultivates the grief, weaving it into the very stones. He wrote of the family's attempts to break free, to starve the entity. Some had fled, only to return, drawn back by an invisible tether, by a deep, unshakable sense of longing for a place they simultaneously loathed and feared. I pushed back from the table, needing to stretch my cramped limbs to break the spell of the journals, if only for a moment. I walked towards the hallway, intending to reach the kitchen for a glass of water, to feel the cool porcelain against my lips. But as I stepped through the study door, something shifted. The door to what should have been the small guest bathroom was gone, replaced by a solid expanse of wall, scarred with peeling wallpaper I didn't recognize. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the subtle warping. Had it always been like this? Was my memory failing, or was the house actively twisting my perception? I forced myself to breathe, to push back the rising panic. This was exactly what Elias had described, the house asserting its dominion over the mind. I returned to the study, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, the journals now seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. Elias's final entries were a desperate plea, a stark warning. It binds us, Blake, not by blood, but by sorrow. Each generation, a new vessel, a new harvest. It feeds on the echoes of our past, twisting our joys into tools of despair, our loves into instruments of loss. My great-grandfather's despair over the blight, my grandfather's grief for his lost fortune, my father's quiet agony over his wife's long illness, all fed it. And now, my own. The words trailed off, a faint smudge marring the final line, as if he had wept onto the page, or simply ceased to be. The horror solidified within me. This wasn't just a house. It was a generational curse, a parasitic entity woven into the very lineage of my family. It didn't just exist here. It was here, in the walls, in the air, in the very blood that ran through my veins. It had been waiting for me. It was a cold that gnawed not at flesh, but at the very marrow of conviction, whispering of ancient, inescapable things. I could not remain. A fierce, desperate resolve ignited within me, a flickering wick against the encroaching gloom. I would leave. My bags, packed hastily days ago in a fit of premonition, stood by the entrance hall, a silent testament to an instinct I had foolishly ignored. I snatched my coat from the peg, the rough wool a meager comfort against the inner shiver. I turned it, a sharp, metallic click echoing in the cavernous space. The door, heavy with age, swung inward with a groan, revealing not the expected gray expanse of the porch and the winding path to the gate, but a wall. A solid, unyielding wall of rough-hewn stone, indistinguishable from the exterior foundation of the house itself. No porch, no path, only a seamless, ancient barrier where an exit should have been. A gasp tore from my throat, raw and disbelieving. I stared, my mind grappling with the impossible, tracing the mortar lines with a trembling finger, seeking some trick of light, some hidden panel. There was none. It was simply a wall. This was a dream, a trick of a sleep-deprived mind. I closed the door, the sound of its thudding closure a finality that unnerved me further, and spun around. My breath hitched. I needed a window, any window. The library, I remembered, had a wide bay window overlooking the overgrown gardens. I strode towards the arched doorway, my boots echoing too loudly on the polished floorboards. The air grew heavier with each step, thick and cloying, carrying the scent of dust, damp earth, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood or rust on ancient iron. Entering the library, I found it transformed. The familiar scent of aging paper and leather was muted, replaced by that same earthen tang. The towering bookshelves, once filled with forgotten tomes, now stood bare, their shelves gaping like empty mouths. The stone mantelpiece, carved with grotesque, forgotten faces, seemed to leer at me. This was not the library I knew. This was a nightmare rendered in brick and mortar. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of unreality. A low, guttural thrum began to vibrate through the floorboards. A sound felt more than heard, resonating deep within my bones. It was the house, a living, breathing thing, its very structure groaning with an unseen effort. It was watching. It was knowing. I tried another door, then another, each one leading not to an exit, but to a succession of unfamiliar rooms. A pantry overflowing with desiccated herbs, a small, windowless chamber with a single rusted iron bed, a narrow passage that ended abruptly in a solid, unyielding wall. The house was playing with me, shifting its anatomy, rearranging its organs to ensnare its prey. It wasn't a language I understood, yet its meaning was terrifyingly clear. Mine. The raw scent of earth and decay intensified, filling my mouth, burning my eyes. The walls around me seemed to press inward, the ceiling to lower, the very air becoming a dense, suffocating weight. I was no longer merely in a house. I was within it, consumed by its vast, insatiable hunger. This was its direct, terrifying manifestation, not a spectral figure, but the very marrow of its being, asserting its dominion. There was no escape. The house had closed its trap, and I, Blake, was its captive, a new memory to be devoured, a fresh grief to be savored. I was not merely trapped. I was being absorbed, slowly, meticulously, into the very nightmare my family had tried and failed to bury. It was a cold that spoke of something ancient, something hungry, and it spurred a determination within me, sharp and unyielding. I would not succumb. But the house, it seemed, had other plans for my resolve. As I stood in the great hall, the ancestral portraits watching with their painted, vacant eyes, the very air began to thicken, growing heavy not with dust, but with a palpable sorrow. It was the scent of old grief, a miasma that clung to the tapestries and seeped from the floorboards. The walls around me seemed to ripple, the ornate wallpaper blurring, its patterns losing their intricate geometry, softening, then reforming into something else entirely. The vast, echoing hall narrowed, the heavy oak door at its end shrinking, its stained glass panel replaced by a simple painted wood. I was no longer in Elias's house, not entirely. A small, faded armchair sat where a grand console table should have been, its fabric threadbare. I remembered that chair. It was where my grandmother used to read to me, her voice a soft murmur against the winter wind. The house was not merely showing me my past, it was sifting through it, finding the delicate wounds, the unhealed places. A child's laughter, thin and reedy, echoed from what should have been the kitchen, but which now felt like the entrance to my old bedroom. It was my own laughter, I realized, but it twisted, ending in a choked sob, a sound I hadn't heard in decades, a moment of childhood pain I had long buried. The house was digging. It was reaching into the tender parts of my history, pulling forth the memories of loss, of fear, of the small heartbreaks that shaped me. Then, the true horror began to manifest. The distorted rooms of my past blurred, overlaid with spectral figures, faint as smoke. They were not solid, but impressions, feelings given form. I saw a woman, her face etched with a profound sorrow, standing by a window that overlooked a churning gray sea. Her hands wrung an unseen cloth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her hair, a familiar shade of auburn, told me he was one of Elias's predecessors, a woman from the journals, consumed by a sorrow that had stolen her name. I felt her despair, a crushing weight that pressed against my chest, stealing my breath. The house fed on it, growing stronger, the air around me vibrating with a morbid energy. Next, a man, gaunt and wild-eyed, paced a narrow corridor that twisted into an impossible loop. He clutched a leather-bound book to his chest, his lips moving in a frantic, soundless litany. He was trying to fight it, I knew, just as I was. But the house was stronger. As I watched, his form seemed to fray at the edges, his frantic pace slowing, his grip on the book loosening. This was the reveal. The house was not merely a repository of grief, it was a harvester. It drew forth the sorrow, the trauma, the unmoored memories, and devoured them, leaving only an empty shell. These spectral figures were not ghosts in the conventional sense, but echoes, residual imprints of lives bled dry, their essences assimilated into the dwelling itself. My own grief, the dull ache for Elias, the sudden sharp pangs for my grandmother, for all the small, unacknowledged losses of my life, surged within me. But he had failed. His journals, his reclusive life, his eventual mysterious ended was all part of the cycle. He had been another meal, another memory absorbed into the greedy maw of the ancestral home. I saw his face then, superimposed over the sorrowful woman's, then the frantic man's. His eyes, too, held that desperate clarity, that flicker of understanding before the final descent. He had seen this, felt this, succumbed to this. The house wanted me to understand, not to fight, but to accept my inevitable fate. It wanted me to become another echo, another layer of grief within its ancient, hungry walls. The tension in the air was unbearable. A taut wire stretched to breaking point. My own mind, the instrument it played. It was a cold born of ancient, defeated truths, of generations succumbing to the creeping rot of this place. The house, a living sepulcher, pulsed around me, its unseen tendrils probing, testing the cracks in my sanity. My grief, once a boundless sea, had begun to recede, leaving behind a barren, salt-scoured landscape. And in that arid emptiness, a fierce, desperate clarity bloomed. I would starve the monster that had claimed my kin, that had twisted their memories into grotesque effigies, leaving only husks behind. I began my hunt. Not for a ghost, nor a physical foe, but for a counterspell, a forgotten key to an ancient lock. The journals I had found spoke of desperate attempts, of partial victories and ultimate failures. But there had to be something more, a final buried testament. My search led me through the skeletal remains of what was once a grand library, now a mausoleum of dust and forgotten knowledge. The scent of decaying paper, of dry rot and damp stone filled my lungs, a bitter perfume. I ran my hands over the spines of books. Their titles faded into illegibility, seeking any anomaly, any hint of concealment. The very architecture of the house seemed to conspire against me, shifting subtly, unnervingly. What was once a familiar corridor now stretched into an impossible length, its end shrouded in perpetual gloom. Doors I remembered as solid oak now seemed to be flimsy, half-rotted pine. Walls that should have been smooth plaster were rough, uneven stone, weeping moisture in places. This was its play, its attempt to unravel my bearings, to make me doubt the very ground beneath my feet. A hidden catch, a faint discoloration in the aged wood, drew my eye. With a grunt, I pressed. Within, not a weapon, but a small, lead-bound leather volume, its cover scarred and pitted, alongside a single tarnished silver compass, its needle frozen. The book was heavy, its pages brittle, filled with a cramped, spidery script, almost illegible in places. It was not a journal, but a collection of observations, of theories, of fragmented rituals. An ancestor whose name was lost to the smudges of time had penned these frantic lines, a desperate plea for understanding, a blueprint for survival. It feeds on sorrow, I read, deciphering the fading ink by the dim light of my lantern. it weaves itself into the threads of memory, distorting, corrupting, until the past is a weapon against the living. To fight it is to fight oneself. To win, one must deny its sustenance. One must starve the mind, become an empty vessel, unreadable, unlovable by its parasitic touch. The words blurred, then sharpened. It wasn't about destruction. It was about resistance, about becoming immune. It was incomplete, riddled with crossed-out passages and frantic marginalia. But the core idea was terrifyingly clear. To survive, one had to become less human, less vulnerable. One had to sacrifice the very essence of self that made life worth living. A wave of nausea washed over me. To become unreadable, unlovable, what would be left? But the alternative was to become a puppet, a screaming echo in the house's endless hunger. My choice was already made. I spent the remaining hours before the first hint of dawn studying the text, absorbing its grim wisdom, preparing my mind for the ordeal ahead. The house, sensing my shift in focus, intensified its assault. But I closed my eyes, picturing the intricate patterns described in the ancestors' notes, building mental walls, severing the threads. I was dismantling myself, piece by painful piece, to deny it a foothold. I gathered the necessary implements: a small, sharp blade, a vial of salt, a fragment of charred wood from the hearth. Symbolic tools for a battle waged not with steel, but with will. But beneath them, I felt a tremor, a faint flicker of its own fear. It knew I was preparing. It knew I understood. The ancestors' words, brittle with age and desperation, lay open before me. A path, fragmented and veiled in riddles, yet undeniably a path. Detachment. Severance. Not to destroy, for how does one destroy a hunger that has no physical form, only a voracious appetite for the mind's tenderest offerings? No, the goal was immunity. To become a ghost within a ghost, untouchable by the tendrils of its insidious grief. My hands, surprisingly steady, closed the journal. A cold resolve settled in my bones, a weight heavier than any fear. The house, as if sensing my intent, pressed in. The floorboards beneath my feet groaned, not with the settling of old wood, but with a deeper, more resonant sigh, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the earth. I began the ritual as outlined, a series of mental exercises, a focused unraveling of the threads that bound my being to the past, to sorrow, to all the emotional anchors the entity craved. I closed my eyes, picturing the faces I loved, the moments of joy, the pangs of loss. And then, with a searing effort of will, I began to snip. Each memory, precious and painful, was a chord. A low hum began, vibrating not in the air, but within my very skull. It intensified, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to shake the marrow of my bones. When I opened my eyes, the grand hall was gone. I stood in the corridor of my childhood home's slightly wrong rooms in the wrong order. The familiar floral wallpaper, a pattern I hadn't thought of in decades, stretched down a hall that was far too long, too narrow. The light, usually soft and yellow, was a sickly, jaundiced glow. My old bedroom door was where the kitchen should have been, and the faint, sweet scent of my mother's baking, a phantom echo wafted from behind the door to the linen closet. This was its counterattack, its first insidious thrust. Why are you so sad? My resolve hardened. This was not her. This was the entity, weaving a tapestry of longing and regret. I focused on the ritual, the detachment. I fought to separate the true memory from the entity's parasitic imitation. Sever. I imagined a sharp, clean cut. The walls of the childhood home began to warp, the wallpaper patterns writhing like trapped insects. Each voice was a hook, trying to snag a piece of my mind. Then, The rooms in the wrong order began to shift more violently. The door to my bedroom, still where the kitchen should be, began to bleed a thick, inky blackness from its seams. The scent of lilies intensified, now overpowering, sickly sweet and laced with the metallic tang of old blood. It was trying to overwhelm my senses, to drown my thoughts in a tide of manufactured despair. I pushed back, my mind a fortress against the onslaught. The ancestors' riddle, the incomplete part of the ritual, suddenly coalesced into meaning. It wasn't about simply letting go, but about understanding the mechanism of its hunger. The entity didn't just feed on grief, it became the grief. A living, breathing sorrow that infected everything it touched. To see its false comfort, its deceptive longing, for the parasitic mimicry it was. As I grasped this, a profound shift occurred. The suffocating pressure in my mind, the weight of 1,000 sorrows, became clearer. I saw it not as a chaotic assault, but as a single monumental force. A vast swirling vortex of pure, unadulterated yearning. It was not a creature of tooth and claw, but a gaping maw of cosmic loneliness, seeking to devour all warmth, all light, all individual thought. It stretched, a silent scream of existence, pressing down on me, threatening to flatten me into nothingness. My memories, my identity, my very sense of self began to fray at the edges, pulled by the vortex's terrible suction. I could feel the thin membrane of my sanity stretching, threatening to tear. But I would not break. I was Blake. I was here. And I was not a meal. With every fiber of my being, I tightened the mental cords I had woven, the shield of detachment. I saw the vortex, vast and terrifying, but I refused to be drawn into its center. I stood on the precipice, acknowledging its power, its ancient, consuming hunger, but denying it my essence. I was a tiny spark against an endless night, but I was a spark that refused to be extinguished. The last guttural sigh of the house was not sound, but a cessation of pressure, a vacuum where a crushing weight had been. My lungs, which felt as though they had been compressing for months, finally expanded, drawing in air that tasted of dust and salt, yet felt clean. My vision, blurred by the frantic dance of shadows and phantom faces, slowly sharpened. The ritual, or whatever desperate plea for quiet I had uttered, was done. I stood amidst the wreckage of the study, the overturned chair a broken sentinel, the scattered journals like fallen leaves. My limbs were leaden, each muscle fiber protesting the sudden release from tension. The air, once thick with the house's hungry breath, now hung still, heavy with the scent of aged paper and something metallic, like ancient rust. The immediate aftermath was silence. It hummed in my ears, a high-pitched whine that eventually faded, leaving only the dull throb of my own pulse. I could feel the house around me, no longer a predatory beast, but a vast slumbering entity. Its tendrils of malice had retracted, leaving behind a husk of its former malevolence. It was dormant, a sleeping dragon, its breath held. My gaze drifted to the window. The fog, a constant companion, still clung to the panes, but it seemed less eager, less invasive. It was merely weather now, not a shroud woven by the house itself. The light, what little there was, filtered in with a muted quality, painting the room in shades of bruised violet and gray. I moved, each step a deliberate effort, through the quiet halls. The floorboards, which had groaned and shrieked with spectral life, now only creaked beneath my weight, the mundane protest of old wood. But the house was not entirely returned to sanity. As I walked, I noted the subtle shifts, the almost imperceptible alterations that remained. The grand staircase in my mind had always turned left at the landing, but now it veered right. It was a scar on the fabric of my perception, a permanent memento of its power. I ran a hand along the wall, the plaster cool and firm beneath my fingers. Yet the house felt different. It was not empty. It was full of a vast, unmoving presence, like a mountain that had merely closed its eyes. The curse was not broken. It was merely subdued. And I, Blake, was its keeper. The ritual had not freed me, it had bound me. I was the lock on its cage, the sentinel at its gate. My mind, once a battleground, now held the echoes of its hunger, the imprint of its deceit. I carried the memories of the grief it had consumed, the longing it had twisted. My own grief, my own longing had become the bait, the lure that had drawn me here, and now they were the chains that tethered me to this place. A profound loneliness settled over me, heavier than any physical burden. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? My reality was forever skewed. The world outside, the vibrant, chaotic world of other people, felt distant, almost irrelevant. My existence was now defined by these walls, by the dormant evil that slept within them. I was the silent guardian, the keeper of the house's secrets, condemned to watch over its slumber, to ensure it did not wake. I walked to the vast, dust-laden window in the main hall, looking out at the persistent fog that blurred the line between land and sea. The distant, mournful cry of a seabird was the only sound that pierced the profound quiet. The house stretched out behind me, vast and still, a mausoleum of forgotten pain, now under my reluctant custodianship. I was its anchor, its jailer, and its eternal prisoner. It was merely a new beginning, a long, silent vigil stretching out into an uncertain, terrifying future.